Welcome to Mushroom Mondays with Spore. I'm your host, Michael Zavet, co-founder of Spore Life Sciences. In this episode, we'll be discussing the science and legalization of magic mushrooms with neuroscientist Dr. Michele Ross. Hey, Michele.
Hi, I'm so happy to talk about magic mushrooms. That's my favorite topic.
We're very excited to discuss that with you today. It's also one of my favorite topics. And I'm sure our viewers are very curious about, all the wonderful benefits the magic mushrooms can offer people. And of course, this is, it's sort of an old compound. We've known about it for a long time, but it's making a massive resurgence in the health and wellness community.
Absolutely. And I think that there's so many things that people don't understand, right? They don't understand certain things about functional mushrooms. They don't understand what magic mushrooms are all about and how they're different. So there's so much to cover here. I think it's just something where there's just so many questions that just need to be answered. And, the science is just catching up with it.
Absolutely. And for the viewers that don't know, we're very lucky to have Dr. Michele Ross on today. She's the Director of Education here at Spore Life Sciences and the co-host of Mushroom Mondays podcast.
Well, it's nice to be interviewed this time.
Absolutely, yeah, the roles are reversed. So I guess kicking things off, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you started off researching early on in your career versus, what are you working on now?
Sure. So I'm a neuroscientist. So I have a PhD in neuroscience. And a lot of times people don't really know what that means. So neuroscience is basically brain science, but there's so many different fields. So I specifically study molecular psychiatry. And so that's how drugs, both legal drugs and legal prescription medications like Prozac or Xanax impact the brain. And so I started off my career actually studying the effects of drugs like cocaine, cannabis, magic mushrooms on the brain. And it's sort of interesting because, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, we were very much focused on illegal drugs. Cannabis is an illegal drug. We need to study how harmful it is to the brain and convince other people not to use these drugs. My specific specialty was looking at how drugs impact the birth of new brain cells in the adult brain. And people don't know you actually grow new brain cells throughout your whole life. And it's actually important for things like learning and memory, mood regulation. So, not being depressed, being motivated to go do things. So you have these baby brain cells that are really important for integrating into the circuitry of the brain and allowing you just, again, to operate, in a healthy way and remember things, learn things. And it's even more important as we get older, right? Because we start to lose that ability to start remembering and learning. And so really keeping your brain healthy throughout life is a good focus. We know things like alcohol, hard drugs, things like that can actually impact our brain in a negative way. And so part of my work, in the early years was to try to figure out, what different drugs, whether they're legal or illegal, were doing to the brain, and they were harmful or helpful. And sort of exciting that some of my early work was suggesting, hey, some of these plant medicines like cannabis, magic mushrooms, things like that, may actually be helpful for the brain. They may actually grow new brain cells. And that was the complete opposite, of course, what the government, wanted us to find out as scientists. But what we found, is that any drug, whether it's a prescription medication or it's a plant medicine like cannabis or psychedelic mushrooms, if it increases serotonin, which is a neurotransmitter in the brain, it can actually grow new brain cells because these new brain cells they have receptors on them. They're very responsive to different neurotransmitters or different signals or hormones that are being produced in the brain. And so basically, serotonin is like fertilizer for new baby brain cells. And so it's sort of interesting. We thought that these things might not be healthy for the brain, but in fact they are. So that was sort of an interesting thing. I went into this whole field from drug addiction, right? I grew up in New Jersey and was very much anti-drugs and going, I'm going to help everyone, get off of illegal drugs, including mushrooms. And then, as a scientist, you have to be open to the science. You have to be open to the data. You can't just have a very biased mind. You have to be open. And my brain really opened up to the fact that maybe we didn't quite understand, what the full potential of these different plant medicines are. Maybe they're not illegal, illicit drugs of abuse. Maybe they actually are medicines in some cases. And that sort of flipped my entire career, here I was thinking that I was going to save everyone from magic mushrooms and cannabis and things like that. And over the years, due to health reasons and things like that, I started exploring these plant medicines myself, started working with clients and things like that, and just saw a complete, potential for these plant medicines to be used in mainstream health.
Mm-hmm. That's very fascinating. And yeah, it's so true that, a lot of these medicines or compounds are sort of shelved for so long because of really political reasons for the most part. And so we didn't get to really, discover their benefits for so many years. And yet now there seems to be a renaissance where people are opening their minds to these compounds again. And, they're under the lens once again. And I think that's great. And will lead to hopefully, tons of new discoveries and help, millions of people. So nowadays, do you spend most of your days in a lab studying cells in a petri dish or testing mice, or how does it work?
Yeah, so I mean, there are scientists out there that spend most of their days in the lab. I've had sort of an untraditional career in so many ways, of course, being sort of like the drug scientist, but also in the fact that I don't spend most of my time in the lab. I spend a lot of times creating online education. I speak at conferences. I consult patients about different, ways to help boost their mental health or their brain health with plant medicines, including functional mushrooms, psychedelic mushrooms, cannabis, and again, all sorts of, I would say, nutritional interventions. So I act more as a nutritional neuroscientist right now. Again, I like to say like mushrooms are medicine, mushrooms are food. So it's really nutritional neuroscience, really helping protect your brain or optimize your brain activity. And so, again, I'm not in the lab anymore, but I really do spend a lot of time taking what other people have researched in the lab and producing, applications for that, helping people make personalized medicine and the right choices to really harness the power of these amazing natural foods and natural medicines and incorporate that into their daily lives.
Absolutely, yeah, and education is, a huge part of the battle, of course. So, without content like that out there, people like you educating and helping to, push the science, I mean, we wouldn't be able to progress at the rate that we are right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, science, I think, is sometimes hard for people to understand, and really like taking the hard parts about it and like converting it into language everyone understands, right? That's the only time science is actually used. Otherwise it's, in a big clunky journal that no one can understand.
For sure. And so why do you think you have to advocate for legalization of plant medicine? Like, why are plants not legal?
So it's sort of funny in our Western world that we've made a lot of natural plants illegal. So for example, with magic mushrooms that contain psilocybin, you can actually find them on the West Coast. You can go outside like in Oregon and you go pluck them from the ground, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if they're natural, why are they illegal? So back in the 60s, a lot of different drugs were made illegal. They were put on a drug schedule as Schedule 1. So again, these were the Nixon years, almost over 60 years ago, right? But they basically decided that some drugs should not be sold. They should be illegal to possess, to grow, et cetera, even if they were plant-based. And so this includes cannabis. Cannabis is a Schedule 1 drug, and Schedule 1 in the United States means, hey, this is a drug that has no medicinal value. It's addictive, it's dangerous, it would hurt people, you shouldn't use it. And there's different levels. Like we even have medications that are on lower drug schedules, like Schedule 3 or Schedule 4, where they have some medical benefits according to the US government, but they still need to be regulated because they have some abuse potential and things like that. So, here we have cannabis is a Schedule 1 drug, psilocybin mushrooms or magic mushrooms are a Schedule 1 drug. But then we have other drugs, like, for example, cocaine is a Schedule 2 drug. So the government thinks it has more medicinal value than magic mushrooms. So we have a very much of, I think, a disconnect between what the science says, hey, there are actually medical benefits of taking magic mushrooms or taking these other plant medicines versus what the government is saying, no, don't do that. It's illegal. And you should never, ever grow them or touch these things or use them. And so we know over the years that there are actually a lot of benefits to medicinal and psychedelic mushrooms. There's different ways to take them, but We know in the mental health realm that they're really helpful for people trying to deal with anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder. There are people that have stopped using cigarettes, for example, after consuming small amounts of magic mushrooms. And so we know that there's ability for these mushrooms to really rewire the brain, to really boost healthy hormones in the brain against serotonin levels. There's a lot of disorders where people don't have enough serotonin. That's why they're depressed, or that's why they might be addicted to substances and things like that. So we know that balance is so important in your brain, having healthy neurochemistry. And magic mushrooms are a way to do this without, I think, some of the side effects of traditional medications. We know that, say, antidepressants or anti-anxiety drugs, they can be addictive. They can be hard to withdraw from. And so, naturally, in different cultures, people have used medicinal and psychedelic mushrooms to, work with certain conditions, right? To even just improve the quality of life, to feel more, to enjoy music, to be creative. And there's a lot of different applications for medicinal and psychedelic mushrooms that aren't necessarily focused on just treating a condition, right? Western medicine is very much make a pill for a condition. It's not, hey, improve your life, be the best person you can be. And I think that we're learning now from other fields of medicine, especially how medicine is practiced in Eastern medicine, that we might be doing it wrong. We're really focused on the illness, and we're not focused on illness prevention. We're also not focused on mental health that much. And mental health is something that is so neglected in the United States. Just see a psychiatrist, get a pill. That's all we do for you, really. And we know we're depressed, we're sick, we're sad, especially during this last year. We know that mental health has been sort of a crisis that has really been overlooked in this country. And Absolutely. Here we have something natural, right? That doesn't cause overdose, that can be used, intentionally, whether it's eaten, whether it's used in capsules, whether it's used in tea. People make mushroom tea, right? There's all different ways for people to use this. And they can also even grow it in their houses and things like that. People have little jars, they grow little mushrooms. It's very similar to growing regular mushrooms, like oyster mushrooms, reishi, things like that. You can grow any type of mushroom, at your home. The problem, however, is that it may not be legal, depending on what kind of mushroom you're growing. So I would say, when you're thinking about, psychedelic mushrooms, magic mushrooms, do a little research on what they are, whether it's legal where you live. I would say in the most recent years, we've actually done a lot of work trying to raise education and awareness about the illegality of these mushrooms, and try to actually legalize in different places. For example, I was one of the first scientists actually to be advocating for magic mushroom legalization. And it sounds sort of crazy, 5 years ago, no one was really saying, hey, let's legalize mushrooms. Everyone was very focused on legalizing cannabis or medical marijuana, right? But no one was really thinking, hey, we could also legalize magic mushrooms. We can do both of those things. And we actually started, talks and putting together people to try to change some of the laws across the country, and saying, hey, if we have medical cannabis, why can't we have medical mushrooms? They have some of the same effects. They're also safe. You can't overdose on them, things like that. And I was part of the founding team that helped legalize magic mushrooms in Denver, Colorado, which is the very first city in the entire United States to do that. And they're not really they're not 100% legal. You can't say go into a cannabis dispensary and buy magic mushrooms. What we have as a legal basis, a first step in this country for allowing some use of magic mushrooms, is in certain cities and certain states. Again, every city has different rules about this, but in Denver, it was that if you were found with magic mushrooms in your possession, that you weren't going to be arrested, charged with a felony. You might get a warning, don't have them or something like that. But so far, nothing has really happened. In some cities, it's been much more open, where they're you can grow them, you can share them. And in some states like Oregon, there's even actual structures to regulate it. So for example, in Oregon, they decriminalized it. So that means that if you are using it, it's okay. But they would prefer that people use it in a more context of a doctor clinical setting, where you can actually work with a therapist under the influence of magic mushrooms to help deal with some of your trauma, addictions, and things like that. And that way you are, being made sure that you are being taken care of, one, during the psychedelic experience, which can be scary for somebody that may not be comfortable with it, but also what we call an integration period, where you take the things that may have happened to you, say some of your memories that were replaying and things like that. You actually work with a therapist to work through those things and learn how to incorporate like your new feelings, your new outlook on life with a therapist for maximal benefit. And I do say that, people do use psychedelics and things like that for, recreation, right? Like they want to go to a concert and have fun and things like that, but you can also use them in a very medicinal way. So there are different ways to use things. And I would say that, just consuming something doesn't mean you're going to get a medicinal effect from it, right? It's about the attention and things like that. So, people journal, people, talk to therapists online. There's now a lot of like what we call psychedelic integration therapists and things like that. There are now platforms like Psychable where people could actually say, I want to have this experience. I visited or I live in a place where psychedelics have been legalized, like Oakland, Denver, and I want to try this, but I want to be safe about it. And I want to be intentional about it. And you can look for professionals that are trained in this. And that's actually really exciting. Now, I want to just mention too, the United States has sort of like, we're always behind the ball compared to some other countries. So for example, Mexico, right? Mexico and Jamaica both allow for growing mushrooms. You can even import mushrooms from Jamaica into the United States for research purposes, but you can't use mushrooms that are grown in the United States for clinical research. It's hilarious. We actually have to import them from outside our country for the DEA to allow us to research them. So Canada hasn't fully legalized magic mushrooms, but they sort of made it like a low enforcement priority. So people are able to actually purchase magic mushrooms from some dispensaries. So they even have like mushroom dispensaries. There's a lot of groups that are doing research on it right now for everything from brain injury to mental health to even chronic pain. So they're a little bit ahead of us in terms of doing the research and really understanding the medical value of it. So it's nice when you can be in a country where you don't have to advocate as much. Like we have to do so much work, even like as scientists, we weren't used to having to advocate and do like political stuff, we're talking to legislators and things like that in order for our research to be able to happen or for our patients to be able to have compassionate access to some of these substances. But, that's how it has been in the United States because again, the war on drugs and again, even plant medicine being classified as a drug is still very real. So we have so much work to do here in the United States. My work with Denver, I worked with Decriminalize California to try to pass laws there. And they're getting closer to decriminalizing the entire state, which is amazing. In Nevada, we are one of the slowest states to legalize cannabis. So we may be also very slow to legalize mushrooms, but I'm one of the co-founders of Decriminalize Nevada. So we are slowly trying to change laws here. It may take a couple years, but I think it's really important that somewhere that, again, is a destination for so many people around the world to be able to have access to medicine, learn about it, et cetera, feel safe and not be criminalized for something that grows out of the ground is so important. So
absolutely. I've always found it super backwards that, it's benzodiazepines and opiates are readily available to treat all types of issues when we know these drugs are super harmful in the long run and addictive. And yet, people have to jump through hoops just to get their hands on something that grows very naturally and is relatively harmless.
Yeah. And I would point out, when you look at rehabilitation centers, right? You don't see that many people in there for magic mushrooms or something like that. It's a very low amount of people that are saying, oh, I'm addicted to magic mushrooms. It really doesn't have that kind of effect. Most people will take them, occasionally. They're not taking them every single day, with the exception of some people that might be microdosing or taking very, very small amounts, almost as an antidepressant. We're not talking about people basically like tripping every single day and not being able to hold down jobs or something like that, or robbing banks because they have to buy mushrooms. Mushrooms are more, I would say that they're inexpensive compared to some of the other things. They have a lot less harmful side effects. We know that drinking, right, regularly will do much more harm to your brain than doing any of these substances. So it's very interesting that the mindset, again, we're going to have to change a lot of the attitudes, I think, of traditional therapists or the rehab, like industry, where people think that if you take something, if it's called illegal, it's bad for you, right?
Yeah.
And right now, it just happens to be that our government hasn't caught up with the science and the research to put a positive structure on some of these things. And I'm just so glad, again, we do have senators that are discussing, more research money going into this, especially for veterans, brain injury, so many different applications. But I just love that the fact that we're talking about mushrooms now, like psychedelic and magic mushrooms has really helped other people learn about all the other mushrooms that, are magical in their own sense, but are not necessarily like hallucinogenic, like lion's mane, right? It grows brain cells, just like psilocybin mushrooms do. So it's been an exciting time for mushrooms.
Absolutely. And I know you already touched on it a little bit, but can you tell me a little bit about your advocacy work with magic mushrooms?
Yeah. So again, really laying the groundwork for some of the organizations out there. Decriminalize Nature is an amazing, amazing group. They really helped start off, I would say, like 100 different cities across the United States trying to push for legalization. And so, it can be a path that, that takes 1, 2, 3 years to legalize. My work doing some of the first, talks and doing different groups together. I literally hosted the first fundraiser in the United States for raising money to try to decriminalize magic mushrooms in the United States. So, I started out talking about this in 2016. It took to 2017, the end of it, to really get a group together. And then it took till 2019 to pass the bill for decriminalization. And it's interesting because people would think, hey, we're still talking about magic mushrooms everywhere. It'll be so accepted by everyone. But I would say that there's still a lot of stigma about this. I would say that, there's people that believe that, okay, it should only be allowed in a doctor's office. No one should be able to grow it at home or be able to pick them or things like that. Or you shouldn't be able to use it recreationally. Again, it's sort of interesting being a scientist and a clinician in this space, right? When you talk about, having fun, what does it mean to have fun or like experience euphoria? And these are some of the same conversations we have with cannabis, where said, what is recreational use? Is reducing stress? Is feeling an elevated mood? Is that recreational, or is that just being a human? Isn't it the point of life to feel better? I think a lot of us are so stressed that we forgot what it's like to feel good. And a lot of people have no problem with drinking alcohol, right? And it's like, you get high off of alcohol, you're disinhibited, right? But then
we've all seen that firsthand.
Yeah. And then the alcohol, right? It causes inflammation in our brain and our body. It causes pain, it causes hangovers and things like that. Of course, the older you are, the less fun alcohol gets as you get older. But we know that alcohol is very addictive. That alcohol can kill people. And many of us have lost, a loved one to alcohol. And it's just interesting in the same sense, right? We are so scared of what we consider like a high, we're going to change our perception of things. I do want to mention with the magic mushrooms that there isn't always necessarily a high. It's based on dosing. And I want to introduce the terms, right? Microdosing and macrodosing, and even the terms like heroic dose. Like, what does that mean? By the way, heroic dose, that is not where you want to start. So microdosing magic mushrooms is really taking a very, very small amount of mushrooms to the point where you don't want to basically go over the threshold for being high. And so you want maybe like a tiny little bit of mood boost, a tiny little bit of a perception change, but not so much that you are now not able to go to work. So a lot of people will microdose what we call like 0.25 grams, like a very, very small amount. Like we're talking like, okay, if you had a little mushroom cap, you'd be like biting off a tiny little piece of it. You wouldn't be eating the whole mushroom or anything like that. Very small.
1 to 200 milligrams type of thing. Right?
Yeah. And so sometimes people will grind them up with the same type of grinder that they have for cannabis or something like that, put them in capsules so that they know that they're consuming the under the limit for what they personally have as their threshold for becoming high with mushrooms. And just like with cannabis or anything like that, everyone has a different threshold. Some people, if you weigh more, you might be able to tolerate a slightly higher amount. Other people, again, they don't build a tolerance and they just need a tiny little bit, and that's totally okay. So some people eat them, some people put it in capsules, but the goal is that you might just feel a little bit more focused, a little bit more energized, maybe less depression. If you are someone who struggles with depression, you might need a slightly higher dose than somebody who just feels great and just wants to be like super dialed in to crush it at work or something like that. So, again, dosing and everything is something that, you want to work out with a guide, or, journal, things like that. Be your own little scientist. I love this because people are getting into note taking in science and all that kind of stuff. Being a little citizen scientist with this. So the next step would be taking a dose that is, definitely perception shifting, right? You can hallucinate with mushrooms. I mean, some of the first, experiences might be, oh goodness, like lights seem much more bright, music sounds much more intense. I feel a little dizzy. I feel super happy, excited. Want to hug everyone. You might feel those effects of serotonin, and serotonin is really involved with our sensory perception, our bonding, and things like that. So these tend to be doses that are, 1 gram, 2 grams, 3 grams, again, depending on your weight and your experience. But those are normal, doses for what we would consider more recreational experiences and things like that. Now, the doses that are used for, working with trauma or having sort of like almost like vision quest type of experiences, and these are not for the inexperienced person. Heroic doses are what we consider 5 grams and above. That's taking a lot of mushrooms. You need a babysitter with that. You want to make sure that you don't, get lost, go somewhere, you don't want to end up on the news. I took off all my clothes and I ran out somewhere. Like those are the situations where people are like, wow, I had no idea what I was doing. I saw things, did things. So heroic doses are not for inexperienced users. In some cases, in medical settings, people actually put blindfolds over their eyes and just, again, sort of see like hallucinations and things like that, whether our eyes are closed. So it's a much more controlled and calm setting. There might be like very nice, classical type of music playing, really to relax you and things like that. So again, set and setting is the most important thing when you talk about psychedelic mushrooms. You can have a very crazy and chaotic experience, or you could have a very therapeutic experience, depending on who you're doing it with, where you're doing it, if you feel safe, if it's your first time or if it's your 50th time, things like that. I would definitely encourage anyone that's new to this to really read up on it. There are some great books out there like the Psilocybin Companion. There's just so many books out there. Really just don't say pick a whole bunch of mushrooms from outside, which may or may not be poisonous because you didn't identify them correctly. That's another one. People think that they're picking out psilocybin mushrooms and they're actually picking out something like that either it has no psilocybin or it might be harmful. So there's like even apps that can help you identify mushrooms and things like that. But like, don't just go get a whole bunch of mushrooms, take them by yourself and like hope like your PTSD will be gone or your anxiety or depression will be gone. That's very dangerous. It's very dangerous. Yes. And some people might not even be appropriate to be using mushrooms, whether microdosing or macrodosing. So one of the biggest things to look out for is if you are on a medication, like an antidepressant or an MAO inhibitor, right, that might increase your serotonin levels. There's actually a syndrome called serotonin syndrome. So it means that your body doesn't want too much serotonin. It causes bad things to happen, make you very sick, seizures and things like that. And so a lot of times depressed patients who are already on antidepressants will be like, well, I'll take the mushrooms and they'll make me totally undepressed. You have to be careful. So I think that drug interactions and things like that are something that you have to think about. Just because it's a plant doesn't mean it's safe for you. People have died off of eating plants, right? There are, of course, poisonous mushrooms out there, right? So a psilocybin mushroom, just because it's a mushroom, doesn't mean it's safe for you. So please, while you're learning about these things, always do it with the care of a professional. And I know that not all professionals will give you the okay to use magic mushrooms or things like that. That's why there's telehealth. There's other people you can talk to. But like never, ever try something new without knowing whether it's okay to take with your background of your medical conditions, like your heart and things like that, or the prescription medications you're on. Or even, your supplements. Sometimes people will take supplements that they don't realize actually boost their serotonin levels too much. And you need to like stop them for like a week or two before you try something like that. So just really important. Plant medicine, even though it's plant-based, doesn't mean it's safe for everyone. So, again, just do your homework.
for sure. Do your research. You know, don't jump into anything without understanding the risks and, you know, obviously potential rewards. And it always helps to have, you know, a guide or someone help you out with that. I know now there's actually clinics that are licensed to administer some of these drugs, and you know, in a medical setting with you know, medical doctors overseeing it. So there's lots of options out there, and yeah, it's best not to just jump into it and you know.
Yeah, and I would say too, like, it's funny because there are even psychedelic vacations. So like I was saying, like Jamaica and Mexico and some of these other like island type of countries, there are actual retreats out there where they have medical professionals as well as, you know, actual experienced shamans leading what would be very, very spiritual journeys. So a very, very different experience than you might have like, you know, by yourself, like with some headphones, right? If you have somebody who has guided people through, you know, unpacking trauma and having the circles, integration circles to really deal with healing as a group, you know, over a span of a couple days, there has been some really powerful effects with those types of things. So again, you know, the right setting, working with experienced people, not somebody that is your friend who did mushrooms once and is like, I will be your guide. It may not work out the way that you think.
Absolutely. And to your earlier point with regards to microdosing, I've personally microdosed many times. I actually went to go see a psychiatrist, and he was very quick to prescribe me Vyvanse and Adderall. And I really did not like the way those drugs made me feel. And I know a lot of people that I know even have been taking those drugs since they were little children. It's, you know, pretty unfortunate in my opinion. But microdosing really helped me kind of retain focus and sort of brighten my mood as well. It's been a great replacement for those drugs for me personally.
That's a story that I've heard a lot from people, right? So when we think about Adderall, right? Adderall is a stimulant. It works very similarly to other amphetamines in the brain. That's really the class of drugs it is. I actually did research in rats and mice on Adderall on its ability to grow brain cells. And what we found out was that it kills brain cells, especially in the teenage brain too. And so it's sort of terrifying to know that we prescribe Adderall and Ritalin, especially to teenagers who are having this developing brain, right? And then we're giving them less brain cells as they grow up. Like, that's not helping them, that's hurting them. And it has long-term effects. And so, you know, I was also diagnosed with ADHD as a kid. A lot of us smart kids, we don't fit in the normal boxes, right? But it was interesting to see that there are so many alternatives. Like, for example, you know, using psilocybin mushrooms, you know, as an adult to deal with ADHD, or, you know, even some of the medicinal mushrooms, right? Lion's mane is amazing at growing brain cells and increasing brain hormone levels, as well as increasing focus, improving memory, protecting the brain as we age. And so I think that, you know, we talk a lot about magic mushrooms in this episode, but I think also like the functional mushrooms can either be substituted in some cases or actually supplementing them, right? You can take psilocybin mushrooms, you can take lion's mane, and that for you might be the perfect way to really rebalance your brain chemistry and really, you know, get that focus that you're looking for.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, obviously psilocybin mushrooms seem to be everywhere in the news now. You know, do you think this is helping people learn about non-psychoactive functional mushrooms, like the legal ones that don't make people hallucinate?
Absolutely. It's sort of funny because mushrooms weren't really cool. Like, it was funny. Cannabis was everywhere, and the mushrooms were sort of like, ew, I don't eat mushrooms on my pizza. Like, I don't know anything about mushrooms, right? And lion's mane, chaga, turkey tail, reishi, all these mushrooms existed, but like no one was really, you know, investigating them. No one was learning how to grow mushrooms. And now it's sort of funny because I think growing regular mushrooms or growing medicinal mushrooms is sort of like the baby steps into learning how to grow, you know, the magic mushrooms, right? So if you know how to grow oyster mushrooms, you know how to grow even lion's mane. By the way, lion's mane is like one of the coolest mushrooms to grow because it's like this big white fluffy mushroom, right? Everyone is now like showing pictures like online. They're like, look at me cooking this like lion's mane mushroom. Yeah. They're making mushroom burgers, mushroom pasta, and things like that. And so I've seen a lot of art with that. Like one of the influencers I follow online, she takes all these pictures of lion's mane, like makes them into like almost like flowers and things like that. And we weren't really exploring mushrooms like that before. Now there's kits online. Like you can literally go on Amazon and order kits to grow medicinal mushrooms. And it's so crazy. It's just like people don't realize you don't need a whole farm. Like you can grow things in jars. You can grow things out of cartons. Like it's sort of fun. And I'm still learning this process myself. I hate to say it, I don't have a green thumb whatsoever. Like most of my plants are fake plants because I killed most of them. Like I'm the worst herbalist ever in that fashion. Like I'm really good at formulating things, but like growing them, I'm not so good at. And it's sort of funny because mushrooms you don't need the same kind of care. You don't have to be like, oh my God, I didn't water them. They all died. They sort of take care of themselves. So they're easier than growing a cannabis plant or growing some other type of, house plants. Again, in Vegas, nothing seems to stay alive because it's like hot and dry and weird out here. But mushrooms work and they don't require a lot of the same things that people think, when you grow certain plants or cannabis plants, right? You need special lights and you need like tents and you need all the stuff. And it's intense. Mushrooms, literally, you can like take just a carton and like some bird seed and things like that. Like you can learn how to grow both medicinal and psychedelic mushrooms pretty easily. The most important thing is acting like a scientist and having like a little bit of sterile technique, right? It's like washing your hands or using gloves or something like that. But I really love the idea of helping people like understand why mushrooms are important, how they work, right? Medicinal mushrooms have some of the same ingredients as psychedelic mushrooms, right? They have beta glucans. They work in certain parts of our brain. So people are starting to learn the language of mushrooms, learn what spores mean, right? Spores are basically like the seeds of mushrooms. So we're learning the language. And I think it's a great way to, make people aware. And I think it's really cool now too. Like a lot of research is coming out even about like the plain boring conventional mushrooms that go in your pizza and your salads and things like that. We're learning that the more you eat of those, the lower your cancer risk is, the lower, your heart disease risk is and things like that. So we're learning, as we move, I think, towards more of a vegan lifestyle or like a plant-based lifestyle, like we should be incorporating more mushrooms into our diet, period. And then if we can start incorporating again, more of the fancier medicinal mushrooms like lion's mane, things like that, whether in supplement form, food form, et cetera, that's going to be more healthy for us. And then like the peak, is of course when we legalize psychedelic mushrooms, on a broader level, and they start becoming part of, our daily lifestyle or our daily, like, or say our monthly self-care rituals, like our stress management rituals.
Absolutely. So when it comes to, functional mushrooms versus magic mushrooms, is it one versus the other, or do people take them both?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it has to be a one versus the other. I do think that there are some people that are, who are scared to dive into psychedelic mushrooms because of the legality part, right? Yeah. Like I live in Nevada. It's not legal here yet, right? In a lot of parts of the country, it isn't. I would say that it's lower risk than some other things, again, because no one will know if you grow mushrooms, like it doesn't smell or anything like that. But, I think for most people, that might be a little worried about drug tests or things like that. They want to stick to medicinal mushrooms. But again, if you're in an area where, that it's been decriminalized or legalized in some fashion, or if you feel comfortable with, again, that risk level, everyone has a different, level of comfort with risk like that, right? It's like, okay, should I use it? Should I not? If you happen to know somebody that grows and they want to share it with you or something like that, and you're discreet about it, you might want to consider using microdosing and things like that. But I don't think it's one or the other. I don't think that taking psilocybin mushrooms means that you don't need any other medicinal mushrooms. We know that each of the medicinal mushrooms has its own ingredient list, right? Like each of them have very, very different compounds that are very, very different activities, right? So for example, reishi mushroom has different, palette of ingredients than lion's mane, than does cordyceps. So some work on cellular energy. Some are really fantastic at killing cancer. Some are really, really powerful at boosting the immune system. So it's sort of interesting. I think that everyone should sort of explore, hey, what do I need? Like, what am I lacking, or what could I, benefit from? Some people need more energy. Some people need more relaxation. They're like type A, right? Or some people have a high cancer risk, right? If you have a high risk of breast cancer, for example, you might want to look at something like turkey tail or reishi that is powerful at reducing your cancer risk, right? So I don't think that Psilocybin, even though, again, it's like sexy right now because everyone's talking about it, right? There's a lot of companies devoted, to researching it, and we're spending a lot of time trying to decriminalize and things like that. It doesn't mean it's the cure-all, right? We know that psilocybin may have some activities, reducing cancer, things like that. We don't know everything about it, but I would say that there's some medicinal mushrooms for some specific actions that are way more powerful than psilocybin-containing mushrooms. So it's definitely, get all the shrooms, get as many shrooms as you can.
Absolutely.
Because they're our friends.
That maitake mushrooms, the extract from maitake, is actually used in a lot of hospitals, including Sloan Kettering, that put out a research report on its ability to increase our own immune system's ability to fight cancer. And, maitakes are found in tons of restaurants.
Yeah, and that's one of the ones. It's just so funny because it is used in food and things like that, and people don't really, know all the benefits of it. It's interesting. My work with cannabis and cancer patients, right? It's funny because I've been recommending turkey tail mushrooms to melanoma patients for years, both to apply topically as well as to take internally. And there are some clinical research studies showing that it's really, really helpful. And it's just like, it's so amazing because you see the benefits of one plant medicine, and you're like, you combine it with mushrooms, and it's so much more powerful. Like there's almost like an entourage effect in like synergizing between all these different botanical medicines. And I think that we're just starting to learn how to harness them. I think that a normal cancer patient, right, when they're talking to their doctor may recommend, hey, smoke some weed, so chemotherapy might be easier or something like that. But they're not really thinking about it in terms of, hey, this could treat or prevent, again, because the research, is just starting. But in terms of mushrooms, right, like there are studies where mushrooms show that efficacy in cancer. So sometimes it's mind-boggling to me when I have a close friend or family member that gets a diagnosis and their doctors aren't talking about it. I'm like, please, like, if it's not going to interact with the chemotherapy or these treatments that they're using, they should be using mushrooms as support, whether it's for their mental health, whether it's to kill the cancer, or, even to boost the immune system. I think that there's so much power in not getting so sickened by the flu that you die from it. You don't die from your cancer, you die from the flu you picked up. Yeah. And so, not magic mushrooms, but functional mushrooms have just so much more potential. And I think, again, we really need to go back to, nutrition, food is medicine, and incorporate that and make people more aware. I think that a lot of work educating, I think even cancer groups and things like that, about the power of mushrooms for different conditions is so important and so underlooked.
Yeah, absolutely. And like to that point, how do you use functional mushrooms, psychedelic mushrooms, and other plant medicine?
Yeah, so I have a lot of health conditions. My primary one is fibromyalgia, which is a chronic pain disorder that causes brain fog, fatigue, severe nerve pain, muscle pain, and spasms, sleep issues, gut issues, all sorts of things. So basically my entire system is out of whack. And so I don't make enough dopamine, serotonin, like a whole list of things, growth hormones, things like that. So for me, boosting levels of almost everything is so important. Keeping my immune system healthy is so important, because if I get sick, I end up in a flare of my disease where it's so severe I can barely move for like 5 days. I can't work and things like that. So I have to always be practicing almost like preventative medicine, make myself, feel as healthy as possible, but also be able to operate. If you have brain fog and you're a scientist, you can't really work. You can't focus on writing things. So for me, the focus, the energy, all that kind of stuff is really important. So I actually use a ton of mushrooms. So of course, with functional mushrooms, right? One of the things I love about Spore is that they have the functional mushrooms in there. They also have some of the other herbs too. So for example, Mike's Mushroom Mix, which you created, has all different, 12 different types of mushrooms in there. 11, right? And all those have a different purpose. But one of the things that they do really well is balancing your immune system. And each of them has like their own special ingredients, so that they're doing something. And with a disorder like mine, I love that it like hits all the things. I'm like, okay, I don't have to think about it. It's really something that's improved my health and my immune system over time, giving me some energy. I also use the energy performance blend, because cordyceps mushrooms is something that gives me back my cellular energy. In my disease, it's mitochondria aren't working, the energy sources of the cell. And so, if you're tired all the time, you can't focus and things like that. It's just a mess. And so I also use things that help reduce stress because my stress hormones are out of balance. And so things like Chill Out Blend, the mushroom blend there with herbs like ashwagandha, that one doesn't have ashwagandha. I always say that. It's funny. So I have it's with fibromyalgia. I do get a little brain fog. So I'm always like, wait, which one is which? But that one has passion flower, valerian root, things like that help relax. So it's just really important, again, to have a nice blend of, a whole bunch of different herbs that support things. I say, like, with fibromyalgia, most of the patients with this disease are on like 12 different medications. I'm not on anything. So the fact is, like, I may have to take a lot of natural supplements to help, support me, but I would much rather be on plants than on medications that cause things like high blood pressure or addictive, or, oops, I drank alcohol and I had a painkiller and now I'm dead. Like, I don't have to worry about anything. Everything is natural. It's helping reduce inflammation. It's helping support my wellness. And, if I use other things, like, for example, psychedelic mushrooms, right? I don't microdose every day because I actually have pretty high serotonin levels. But I do macrodose probably about once a month, just to, again, support the serotonin, to relax, to reduce pain and things like that. We know actually psychedelics are actually really helpful at reducing pain and inflammation. And people were sort of shocked by that. They were like, wait, we thought they were just good for mental health, and they're actually helpful. People with Lyme's disease are now using psychedelic mushrooms, different chronic pain disorders. So it's sort of interesting, it's something that I've used for many years now to really keep me balanced and healthy. I used to have a lot of big problems with depression. Being a chronic pain patient can be very, very depressing. So I just like being able to have like a nature's pharmacy, at my disposal, and be like, okay, I'm having a bad focus day. I'm going to pick this type of mushroom or this type of supplement. I'm having a low energy day. I'm going to pick this. Or, I'm really struggling with, taking on too much for work, or, or some other kind of life event, and I need to really focus on lifting my depression up. I will go for this. So I think it's really about understanding all of the tools, all the plant medicines at your disposal, and figuring out when to use them, because it's not use them all at the same time. I think there's a time and a place for them. And I think that, again, it's like, mushrooms every day for sure. Again, it's like Mike's mushroom mix, really important to always have some level of mushrooms in there so that your immune system is healthy. But also remember, when to use what things. And, for me as a scientist, it's taken, like, I found my like magic, balance, right? And I think for a lot of people, they're probably underdosing with supplements because everyone thinks that they're way healthier than they are. It's like our systems are so out of balance.
Absolutely. And if you want to learn more about Dr. Ross's journey with fibromyalgia and how she uses mushrooms for that, you can check out her episode of Wellness Wednesdays on fibromyalgia and mushrooms, available on Spore Life Sciences YouTube channel. So moving on, I'm curious, is it safe for someone to use CBD, cannabis, and mushrooms all around the same time?
Yeah, that's actually like a question I get a lot, because I do advocate for all of the things, right? And they're like, wait, you want to take all of the plant drugs all at the same time, right? So one thing that we do know about CBD is that it can inhibit the breakdown of certain medications and drugs. So for example, if you took CBD before you dosed like either a large macro dose of mushrooms or a heroic dose of mushrooms, you might actually get a slow onset. So it might be delayed kicking in of the psilocybin or the hallucinogenic effect. So you might not want to take CBD before you take magic mushrooms. You might want to use those on different days. So just to give you guys a heads up, there are some people that microdose small amounts of CBD and small amounts of psilocybin together. And they use that for more like focus and performance and things like that. But in general, it's not really great to use CBD before large doses of mushrooms. And for me, I don't use CBD every day either, or cannabis every day. I sort of alternate, depending on what system I'm trying to optimize or boost or things like that. But everyone, again, has a different way of using it. But I would say like CBD can interact with something. So just be mindful about how you use all the things at once.
Yeah, absolutely. And what do you think the future of mushrooms for wellness is?
Yeah, I mean, we're just at the tip of the iceberg. Like, this is such exciting times for mushrooms. So I think that the future is really going to be probably combining, again, psilocybin mushrooms with some of these different formulations, right? What does psilocybin plus lion's mane do? What does psilocybin plus reishi do? What do all of them do together? I think we're at a time right now where people are excited about growing mushrooms at home. They're learning about things. They're learning about how to make their own, use food as medicine at home. And I think that we're going to have a shift from, I think, like the doctor patient relationship where the doctor knows everything and the patient just listens and gets prescribed pills. I think we're going to start to shift to where people are starting to do preventative medicine and start healing themselves at home with food, with, more, I would say, vegetarian or plant-based diets and things like that, incorporating mushrooms. So, I would love a world where everyone has at least eaten one lion's mane burger in their entire life, right? Like that shouldn't be weird. It should be like normal. It's like, cool, I wanted to boost my brain today. I ate a lion's mane burger, right? So I think that, more education is happening. I think that really cool formulations are going to be coming out, especially once we legalize at the federal level. Here, again, Canada is light years ahead of us, but the United States will catch up eventually. And then, no worries. So I think that there's definitely a lot of stuff there's so much potential out there, and there's going to be so much research. So I would say, I think we're looking to a future maybe where Alzheimer's doesn't have to happen because we've harnessed the power of both medicinal mushrooms, psychedelic mushrooms, and maybe some of these other things like cannabinoids, things like that, so that our brain can really age healthily. Like we could maybe live to 150 and we'll be present and, healthy.
Fine, right.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's fascinating, for diseases like fibromyalgia or multiple sclerosis or different neurological conditions, right? Like we are so close, I think, to unlocking what is causing those issues and what kind of natural medicines can we use. And even, we might understand that there are active ingredients in mushrooms. We know, like with pharmaceuticals and things like that, like we can sometimes tweak a natural ingredient just a little bit to make it even stronger or be absorbed by the brain better and things like that. So like there are actual pharmaceuticals that are based from things like mushrooms or based from natural plant medicine. So I think that, the future of medicine is really going to be, plant-based. So I'm really excited about these things. I look forward to a world where no one has to suffer through some of the illnesses that we had. We're like, oh, remember back in the 2000s when people had these crazy diseases that we don't have anymore. Like that's what I want the future to be, that we've really unlocked the power of medicinal and psychedelic mushrooms to really prevent and treat disease.
Hey, Michele.
Hey, we're back.
We are back. Okay, well, we lost you there. Let's get on to kind of the next question that I had for you. So what I wanted to ask is, how could someone get involved in helping make magic mushrooms and other psychedelic plant medicine legal in their state or city?
Yeah, so there are hundreds of cities and several states that are working together with a group called Decriminalize Nature to really try to pass legislation to make mushrooms and other substances legal. Of course, there's a pharmaceutical route, but again, trying to create access for everyone and be able to, again, consume something that grows on the ground, so important. So if you look up decriminalizenature.org, you'll be able to find sort of like the parent nonprofit that organizes a lot of it. But you can also do things like, go on Instagram or Facebook and search for decriminalize and then like your city or your state, and you might be able to find your local group. Those are great because, again, they all have meetings online. If you don't have the time to volunteer, and of course, I know everyone's so busy right now, right? You can donate to these organizations to help be able to fund some of those initiatives. Or, again, it's just something as simple as if there's something being voted on in your city or state, right? Go and vote for it, right? Show up and vote, register to vote, because again, every vote counts. We know from Denver, hilariously, it was like literally like a couple of hundreds of votes that helped pass it. We passed 51% were in favor of Denver decriminalizing magic mushrooms and 49% were against it. So it was literally just a couple of hundred of votes that made the difference. Even the CNN reported that we actually hadn't passed it because everyone thought that it was so close that we weren't going to do it, and we did it. So it was, just a handful of people getting to the polls that mattered. So, every vote matters, every dollar matters. In the fight basically to legalize plants and fungi. So, your vote and your dollar matters.
Absolutely. So get involved is the moral of the story. And if someone has questions about how to use functional or magic mushrooms to improve their health, where can they find you?
Well, of course, I'm super passionate about helping people use mushrooms for wellness. So, in our Spore Mushroom community group, which you can search for on Facebook, Spore Mushroom Community, I'm in there every Wednesday at 5 p.m. PST. Answering questions about health and mushrooms. So you can literally post your questions there. I'll answer them live, or you can just again post your questions in there at any time. I'm always in that Facebook group, so I look at each and every comment. So I will be answering, or a member of our team will. So I'm here to support you on your journey with functional and psychedelic mushrooms. We're all here to get healthier, and again, I'm just so happy to be part of the Spore team.
That's awesome. Well, thank you, Michele, so much for joining us on Mushroom Mondays. This is Mushroom Mondays with Spore Dr. Ross here today. Remember to hit that subscribe button on our YouTube channel to get notified when we go live or have a new episode of Mushroom Mondays. I'm Mike Zavet, co-host of Mushroom Mondays with Spore, and we'll see you next week.